Hey everyone, welcome to Youth Bombs. I'm Craig.
I'm Carson.
And we're the voice of young Canadians, young conservatives in Alachua County. Canada's elections are coming up on April 28th, and it should be an interesting fight between the predominant Liberal Party and Conservative Party in Canada. Carson, what do we have on the table?
Well, it started out looking like a conservative landslide. I mean, it was going to be, as we've seen in recent election cycles all last year, specifically, we saw this in America with Trump's election and then, everything else. There's been an anti-incumbency wave. So it was looking like it was going to be a conservative blowout. So much so that the Liberal Party and its, MPs, in a very rare sight, were actually calling for Trudeau to not run, to drop out of the race, like we saw with Biden earlier this year in America as well. So a lot of America parallels, which does not happen. It is like, even if you think it's uncommon in America, it's even more uncommon in Canada for MPs to go against their prime minister or their party leader because they just have so much control. So yeah, it was looking like it was going to be a conservative blowout.
Mm-hmm, right, and one projection, in fact, showed the Liberals with only about 30 seats, which is very small, though interesting to see. Definitely big downgrade from their current numbers in the hundreds, but they've went back up and are now projected to potentially get that small plurality and have a coalition government again, likely with the NDP.
Yeah, and so the interesting thing was, actually, at one point, I think it was that poll that you were referencing, they were actually going to be not even the opposition party anymore. The Bloc was going to be the opposition party, which is basically a Quebec separatist party, and the third largest party, but it would have been the second largest party. And now it's looking like they will almost certainly either win a plurality or a majority because of, some people are saying it's because Trudeau dropped out. Other people are saying it's because of recent, goings on with America and Trump specifically and trade wars. So it's really interesting, but.
Mm-hmm. And on the trade issue, I think that it remains to be seen whether Carney has the charisma to win and resonate with voters, but he seems to have the message that a lot of Canadians are looking for, contrary to the Trump tariffs, being willing to, quote unquote, take Trump on. So that's what we're seeing from Carney. Do you agree that that's potentially what's really skyrocketing them up in the polls?
Yeah. So there was a recent poll actually that had Trudeau against Poilievre, and Trudeau actually was winning by a lot bigger margins than he was before. So I don't think it was the candidate swap. I think it is 100% due to Trump. And it's really interesting because I think this is part of the reason why Trump won is because people saw Trump as a fighter. They saw Kamala as not so much of a fighter. I think it's the same here. They think Poilievre is going to, bow down to Trump, give him whatever he wants. And I think Carney is going to actually take Trump on head on. And another thing that I think is probably helping the Liberals right now is that they're abandoning the carbon tax, which is by far the, I think, most unpopular policy move that was made under the Trudeau administration. So I think that would probably help.
Right. But it does appear to be smoke and mirrors with the carbon tax, because while they're getting rid of the consumer carbon tax, they are keeping and enhancing the carbon tax on industrial manufacturers. So that's going up, and the prices of energy won't necessarily go down a ton because of that. So smoke and mirrors and tricks there.
Yeah, but it's, I think what matters is what the voters see. And what the voters see is we are reducing the carbon tax. But I just think it's so interesting because you would never see another country influence America's politics so much as you're seeing American politics influence Canadian politics, and you're also seeing this in Mexico. Claudia Sheinbaum, the president of Mexico, is experiencing record high approvals. I believe she was at 85% approval at one point. And now you're also seeing the Liberal Party of Canada experience incredibly high approvals. And Claudia Sheinbaum, for context, is also a very left-wing leader. So I think just the fact that Trump is causing all these ripples with these trade wars is really interesting. But it shows that, like, in America, where we want a fighter, other countries also want that same fighting energy. And I think it shows that maybe these trade wars aren't necessarily the best thing.
I think that the tariffs in this situation were necessary, but Trump probably should have eased up on the rhetoric against Canada, because that is leading the Liberals to success in the polls. And while we do need to stop, say, fentanyl from coming into the country and mass migration from Mexico, at the same time, we have to consider their environments. So with the Canadian election coming up, I would have been more cautious in my messaging if I was Trump while still pursuing a similar policy path.
Yeah, and I don't think Trump cares. Obviously it's not his top priority to see the Canadian Conservatives get elected. But I do think, given that there's probably a lot more of a value overlap between Canadian Conservatives and American Republicans than there is with American Republicans and Canadian Liberals, I think it would have been in his best interest to at least try to, help Poilievre maybe by holding off until the election happened. They had to have an election by October, so holding off or something. But these trade wars, I think this is what you generally see the reaction to tariffs generally is always when one side escalates, another side's going to escalate, and it's going to be a back and forth. This is why economic wars often lead to actual wars, So.
Yeah, and trade is certainly important. You do have to have that crossing of goods over borders, or you will have war. But at the same time, we also have to consider other circumstances regarding, say, the flow of drugs into America. So there are a lot of factors here, and I don't think that we can only look at GDP, but that is one of the key things, and we shouldn't just go willy-nilly on tariffs just for the sake of it. That's not going to help anyone, including American consumers. But
yeah, I'm sure we agree on that, but I do think there should have been more of a concrete, you do this, we'll back off. There needs to be an exchange, right? Like, you can't be negotiating when the other side doesn't even know what you want. And so maybe Trump is saying this is what we want, but he's not actually being specific in this is how we want you to do it. These are the concessions we want you to make, and we will back off on our tariffs. He's not doing that. So what are they supposed to know besides we're being tariffed? We need to fight back. We're going to put tariffs back on them, and it just leads to back and forth.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the White House did release on their website key items that they want from the Canadian government and from the Mexican government. So that might be good for those governments to look at if they're searching for, say, what the answer necessarily is. Because Trump's rhetoric, is broader, but they can look at the specifics if they need to from the trade representatives, from Marco Rubio, and from those documents.
Right, but they made a number of concessions, and then what followed that is more tariffs, right? More tariffs went into effect after they made a number of concessions. So I'm just like, shouldn't there be the opposite? Don't we want to, if we get what we want, shouldn't it be the carrot and not the stick?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think that, look, if we're getting like the full package, then we don't need to do the tariffs. And it would be great if we can have policies that incentivize more trade between the U.S. and Canada. At the same time, we also have more leverage against Canada than they do against us because they are more reliant on the United States than the United States is on Canada. So bit of a dichotomy there, and it's going to have a disproportionate impact.
Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree on that alone, but we are still heavily reliant on Canadian goods. Specifically, Canadian oil makes up a large amount of the oil that we bring into this country. So I really do not think, at the end of the day, that playing these trade war games is the best option. But we've talked about tariffs over and over on this channel, so we don't need to get more into that.
Understandable. And I do want to turn to the PPC party, People's Party of Canada. So that is a splinter movement on the right because a couple years ago, the Canadian Conservatives had a leadership election and Maxime Bernier, the head of the PPC, narrowly lost the leadership election for the Conservative Party. And feeling that the Conservative Party of Canada wasn't to the right enough, he formed his own movement. Do you think that they will play a large enough role in the election to prevent the Conservative possibility of even a minority government?
Well, you're going to have to inform me really quick, but does Maxime Bernier, isn't he the only one in his party who has a seat currently?
Yes, that's correct. And they're performing at about 4% or so in the polls, which...
So that would give them,
probably no seats. But
really?
Yeah, but it would take away from, conservative swing seats.
Yeah. I can certainly see that, and I can certainly see it being another case like, we talked about Germany pretty recently and how Germany's right-wing populist movements are, now they're the official opposition party, specifically the AfD. So I can see that continuing to happen. However, I do think that it's less so than those other countries in Europe, just because I do think that the Canadian Conservatives are pretty populist. Canada's a generally... I would say people would agree that the natural governing party of Canada is the Liberals. The Conservatives really tend to win only when the Liberals really mess up. And so I think, generally speaking, the Canadian Conservatives have been sufficiently populist so as not to upset the large segments of their base. But I can see it becoming a slight problem, especially if the election is just that close.
Right, because you do have those swing seats that it could easily tilt towards the Liberals in those seats where it's a narrow margin, tight margins, and you've got the PPC taking away just enough votes from the Conservatives to edge out the Liberals. At the same time, the PPC is my party of choice for Canada because I believe that they're stronger on the issues and have a tougher leader. But I do align with Poilievre on some of the issues, particularly axing the tax has to be done. So I think it'll be interesting to see where things play out, especially given the Liberals' rise in the polls and potential for that majority government that was completely unexpected.
Yeah, I think the most likely outcome currently is a Liberal plurality government with a coalition with the NDP. However, I'm not. Obviously, things can still shake out. They seem to just continue to gain in popularity over the past few weeks. So I don't know if it's going to plateau, or maybe by the time that I believe it's an April 28th scheduled election rolls around, they might just completely wipe the floor of the Conservatives and expand upon their plurality maybe into a majority. But we'll just have to see.
That being said, thanks everyone so much for watching. We really appreciate it. We upload 3 times a week. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And feel free to email us at youthbombs@electoralrepublicans.com. Thanks so much, everyone.